What are you saying then that Democrats need to do? What should they do?
Well, first thing, they could have done a lot of muscular economic messaging that we didn't do. We could have been for increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour. We could have talked more about raising taxes on incomes above 400,000 and using that money to help young people buy a house. We can certainly shovel the entire identity politics about 50 feet in the ground and bury it.
That wasn't Cenk Uygur. That also wasn't me. That was James Carville, a longtime political strategist who is admitting that following the 2024 dumpster fire that was the presidential election, maybe Democrats need to revert back to their working class roots. Do I think they're gonna do it? Probably not, but one can hope. So look, we'll give him some credit first, but stick around because there's still plenty to critique him on. And we will. But in this new op-ed for the New York Times headlined, James Carville, I was wrong about the 2024 election, here's why. Carville admits that he was sorely mistaken in his prediction that Kamala Harris would crush Donald Trump. Obviously, she didn't crush Donald Trump. She didn't even come close. And like so many others looking for explanations as to why Harris lost, he actually came to the conclusion that it was all about the economy, stupid. So he argues that Democratic campaigns moving forward should be entirely focused on the issues that affect Americans' everyday lives. And he emphasizes that opposing Republicans just isn't going to cut it anymore. You need to offer voters more than that. I mean, look, I've got excerpts from his piece. We'll get to it in just a second. But Waz, I got to bring you in immediately because, I mean, we've now dealt with how many election cycles? It's definitely a Trump era thing where Democrats are like, oh, that guy is so bad. We don't really need to offer much, right? Let's just keep talking about how bad the other guy is. It happened in 2016. It happened in 2020. But by 2024, that messaging had become very stale. And I think that was to the detriment of the Democratic Party, clearly. But what do you think about what he's saying here in regard to focusing entirely on issues that affect Americans' everyday lives, namely economic issues?
I mean, I don't think he's wrong, but I didn't get a chance to read the entire piece. But I wonder if he paired that with an idea that the Democrats for decades, pretty much since forever, even when FDR was running things, there was, a corporate influence. It's just that labor was a lot more ascendant and had more influence within the party because the working class was just a little bit more well organized in the sectors of the economy that could actually shut stuff down. So there was a bit of a seat at the table. What I would love to hear James Carville articulate is that the reason why they don't do this messaging strategy is because it goes directly against their big money donors and their corporate backers. That's it. It's not like rocket science. It's obvious that if you propose and actually deliver on things that make people's lives better all the time, they're gonna like it. But they can't do that in a muscular way because a lot of times, like Kamala Harris came out with price gouge and it was like, whoa, chill. That sounds too anti-corporate. You can't do that. Kamala Harris did come out and talk about the things that were ailing Americans at the very beginning. Then her stepbrother or brother-in-law, whatever the hell he is, the Uber guy, he came in there and he changed that entire thing up. Next thing, it was just, and I have to bring this up every single time. The same day that Biden's, DOJ was suing Google, Kamala Harris was at a fundraiser with them. Literally the same exact day. Yep. And that's basically the dynamic that the Democrats are dealing with, where they're trying to walk this tightrope of the people, the rank and file of the party, and their corporate pimps who basically own them.
Yeah, and look, you make such a devastating point about the conflict between the corporate donors and the electorate, because what the corporate donors want in return for that money conflicts with what Democratic voters want. And so you're seeing less and less registered Democratic voters. You're seeing more and more people leaving the party to register as independents, like I did. And it's because they look at what the Democratic Party represents today, and it's very different from the party of FDR. And at some point, the party needs to understand that they're accepting that money to the detriment of their party and the ability to win elections, because Kamala Harris outraised Donald Trump by a lot. And that money didn't help her. I mean, homeboy won the popular vote. He swept the swing states. It's just, I don't know if I think they're addicted to that money. So we'll see what happens. But, at least some are starting to wake up to the reality that the party no longer represents working class values, and that is a problem. So he emphasizes that opposing Republicans, not enough. You need to put forward and he puts it this way, wildly popular populist economic agenda. This year, the Democratic Party leadership must convene and publish a creative, popular, and bold economic agenda and proactively take back our economic turf. Go big, go populist, stick to economic progress, and force them to oppose what they cannot be for in unison. Let's start by forcing them to oppose a raise in the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Let's make Roe v. Wade an economic messaging issue and force them to block our attempts to codify it into law. So, look, I will say, on one hand, he's like, go bold, $15 an hour minimum wage. And it's like, okay, I mean, that's from 2016, but all right. I don't know how bold that is. Let me float an idea here and see what you think about it, because look, I'm not necessarily in favor of big government, right? And so I would love to live in a country where workplace conditions and pay is actually negotiated and decided with labor unions having a seat at the table, right? I think that makes far more sense than having the federal government set a federal minimum wage. And so if the small government right-wingers are serious about what they allegedly want, well, I mean, you could cut down on government if you empower workers to organize their workplaces, join unions, and allow unions to actually have a seat at the table. Repeal the Taft-Hartley Act. Repeal the notion that, you don't have to pay dues, even if it's a unionized job, and even though the union still has to offer you the same protections. You get what I'm saying? Like, pass something like the PRO Act. And at that point, you can have labor unions that actually represent the workers have a seat at the table and make decisions about what the workers get paid, what the regulations of the workplace are. And it's more personalized to what the field of work is, what the work environment is like. But I don't think they would ever do that in a million years.
Yeah, I don't know how or why they would support that. Especially, it's not just that, the corporate class has been funding the party for so long. It's that the people who run the party, the corporations and those people are their class cohorts. Those are the peoples they went to school with. These are the people that they more identify with on a social level than some guy, quite frankly, in a UAW union hall. Like this just plain and simple. Like, they don't share the same culture as these non-college educated working class folks. So I think that's one of the difficulties, but I do think you're right to point out that it's just of an imperative, because the bottom line is, man, if workers aren't organized, and by organized, what do I mean? Be able to strike a blow to capital, shut the economy down, make their pockets scream when we don't get concessions. It's going to be tough to ever get these folks to the table, because that's literally the only thing they ever respond to. Okay, They're not gonna come up with great working conditions and stuff like that on their own and treat people fairly on their own. There needs to be a bulwark against their money power. We need to be able to, strike a blow at that money power collectively. And I think the only way to do that is to organize.
Yeah. And I mean, look, you can compare the failed US model that we currently have with what Scandinavian countries do. Scandinavian countries don't have federal minimum wages. because they have unionized workers who negotiate for pay, and they tend to get paid, comparatively speaking, more than average Americans do. And so that's something to keep in mind when we move forward. And I don't want to be reliant on the whims of the federal government. The federal government is an abject failure, okay? It is bloated. I do think it's bloated. I do think there are far too many bureaucrats that are intentionally there to prevent the passage of good legislation. So we'll see what happens, but I will give Carville some credit for some of what he's saying now. He admits that Democrats need to catch up when it comes to modern media. That's another example. By the way, you don't have to catch up with modern media. Just don't be a-holes toward new media outlets that have ideas that differ from your own a tiny, tiny bit, right? Look, let's keep it real. The left had Joe Rogan. The left pushed Joe Rogan away. You can't do that and then whine about how the left doesn't have its own Joe Rogan. They had their own Joe Rogan. I remember when Bernie went on Joe Rogan's podcast, that was an incredible episode of his podcast, right? To the point where Joe Rogan ended up endorsing Sanders. But Sanders was ridiculed and was harassed over his decision to speak to naughty, Joe Rogan. But look, the purity politics is another thing that I think is going to continue hurting the Democrats, and they're super hard-headed about it. So it is what it is. And by the way, he says our economic message must be sharp, crisp, clear, and we must take it right to the people. To Democratic presidential hopefuls, your auditions for 2028 should be based on two things: how authentic you are on the economy, and two, how well you deliver it on a podcast. Finally, Carville says Democrats need to communicate differently with voters on the other side of the aisle, saying, I don't always agree with Wall Street, but Jamie Dimon was right when he said that Democrats railing against ultra MAGA was insulting and politically tone deaf. Denouncing other Americans or their leader as miscreants is not going to win elections. Focusing on their economic pain will, as will contesting the Republican economic agenda. Sounds like a collaborator to me. What do you think, Waz?
Look, all he's saying is don't go Vivek Ramaswamy on there and just completely insult and denigrate an entire culture and an entire people with just one broad brush. There's just no reason to do that and paint by numbers like that. Seems kind of rather intuitive. And stay consistent on your messaging for the people. And the thing about consistent, it matters. And I know a lot of people well, Kamala didn't run a woke campaign. You can't, if she doesn't run a woke campaign for 3 months, that can't compare to 10 years basically of woke Democratic Party mainstream politics. There has to be some consistency in what you're doing. Voters aren't complete idiots. That's I get tired of saying this, man. I know, yes, there are some people who are, basically in a Donald Trump cult, and there's nothing he could do or say that they would change their mind. That's not the entire voting public. That's not the entire country. And we need to treat people like adults, and we need to talk to them like people who are reasonable and give them something to believe in and hope for.
Totally agree with you on that. Now, while we're definitely giving Carville some credit, there are some things he's been saying recently that will probably upset some folks, including his take on young political staffers. So let's hear what he had to say on that.
When you put a campaign together and you hire young people to do work, let me tell you exactly what you tell these people, what I would tell them. Not only am I not interested in your opinion, I'm not even going to call you by your name. You're 23 years old. I don't really give a what you think. If I were running a 2028 campaign and I had some little snot-nosed 23-year-old saying, I'm going to resign if you don't do this, not only would I fire that mother on the spot, I would find out who hired them and fire that person on the spot. I'm really not interested in your uninformed, stupid jack opinion as to whether you go on Joe Rogan or not.
For the listeners at home, just so y'all know, that's Anna Kasparian's managerial style here at TYT.
No, it's not. Are you kidding me?
Producer Kate can attest. No, I'm kidding.
Don't do that. Don't do. People already
People
believe
are
all
gonna
sorts of.
actually believe that. No, listen. Spiritually, honestly, I agree with him more than I disagree.
What? Come on, Waz.
Look,
Look,
there's just a condescending nature to, some of the beliefs. Like, these young people think there's just so much more advanced than all of this stuff because they learned about trans people when they were 6 than the rest of us. And I'm just like, I get it. Like, y'all got enlightened on certain things before people from previous generations did, and that's cool. You still haven't been through anything in life. You still don't know anything. You still need to show some level of deference to the people that came before you. That being said, you do got to be respectful to young people. You can't just treat them horribly. You can't
True,
not call people by their name. Come on.
Yeah, that was ridiculous. That was ridiculous. It was. Look, on one hand, I understand to some extent where he's coming from, because I'm not saying that maybe I've experienced a little bit of that mindset, but I'm saying that I've experienced a little bit of that mindset, But I would never make the mistake of taking those individuals as like representatives of most or all like young people. Mm-hmm. My team is super young, okay? Like, they're the smartest and brightest people I've ever had the honor of working with. And their opinions and their take and their ideas are usually very good ideas, but more importantly, I take them seriously and I think the show is better for it. So it really depends, right? It depends. Are the people you're working with hungry to learn, but also wanting to contribute? To me, that is the sign of someone that's actually a big asset, whether it's for a news show or a political campaign. So it really depends. But I think what he's specifically referring to, are the more like authoritarian young people who are like, it's my way or the highway. And then they'll publicly shame you if you don't do exactly what they want. Those people are unsavory, I'll put it that way. But I'd still call them by their names, and then maybe by other things behind the scenes.
I'm old enough to have peers of mine, friends of mine, who are now, it's crazy to say, they're managing people. They're in managerial positions, and oftentimes, like, some of the loudest young people are just people that are incompetent. Not that like, there are young people who work hard and kill it, and they're not the ones running off at the yap. It's literally the people with the most ideas and the most ridiculous like way of being at work and the most entitlement are just incompetent people. But obviously you can't just paint every single 23-year-old in the workforce with the same brush. Like, there are reasonable young people. It's just like, if you're James Carville's age and you remember how you were treated and how you treated those that came before you when you were 23, like, the idea that you would even dream of, like typing up a snarky email to your superior, it's just like, it's beyond the pale, right? So I get where he's coming from as an old. It's just, it just needs to be, it just needs to be tweaked a bit.